Hey, beautiful nerds. Thank you for tuning in to the High Fantasy Podcast. This is your co-host, Morgan, and today we have an excellent author interview for you. In this episode, Shalini and I interviewed Mr. William David Ellis. David is a farmer that lives with his wife and two sentient German shepherds on a small farm in East Texas. He raises thornless blackberries and honeybees that definitely are not thornless. He has written for newspapers, published 3 books, and is currently working on a fantasy series set in East Texas called the Harry Ferguson Chronicles. His latest release is Kisses of My Enemy, the 3rd book in the series that involves time-traveling romance, Nazis, and dragons. For Shalini and I, this is one of the most impactful and profound author interviews we've done to date. David was an incredibly humble, insightful, and humorous person, and we really got the opportunity to dive deep into many aspects of fantasy storytelling. I particularly loved our discussion of the influence of one's faith or spirituality in writing, and how everything from plot development, themes, characters, and one's mentality towards writing itself are shaped by what we believe about ourselves and the world we live in. With that, we bring you Mr. William David Ellis. Yeah, sounds good. Oh, and I meant to tell you, Dave, we watched your interview with E.G. Stone. It was quite good. It was very funny.
Well, she's a sweetheart. We're doing an anthology together.
Oh, cool.
I'll tell you about that later, but it's we're writing short stories related to the virus.
Okay, yeah. Very, very good.
And,
timely.
I have a distinctive ethnicity. I'm redneck, and it comes through my speech. Now you are laughing. It comes through my speech and my writing.
Mm-hmm.
She's not. She's very proper and very sweet. And she took a look at one of my stories and said, "You know, I don't think you can badmouth organic food stores and claim they're all hippies." And I'm thinking, well, I was shopping there. Does that make me a hippie too? Anyway, I really enjoy her. Sorry. That was a bad rap.
There's so much overlap these days with that kind of stuff. But anyhow, we'll get right into it.
Hippies are taking over.
Hippies are maybe again? Yeah, for the 3rd time, I guess. Okay. So, Mr. David Ellis, thank you for coming on to the High Fantasy Podcast. It's great to have you. We've been really anticipating having an author interview amidst all this wacky stuff with coronavirus and self-isolation, so it's great to speak to, again, a fellow human being face-to-face. Can't wait to talk to you, sir, and again, thank you for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
And so tell us a little bit more about yourself and the latest release, Kisses of My Enemy.
Okay. Kisses of My Enemy is a 3rd in a 5-book series. And basically, Harry has lost the love of his life, which he rediscovered in the first 2 books. And he was never able to connect with her because they had both been changed by traveling down the time streams. He actually lived in East Texas for 60 years after he was spit out in time stream. But Sarah, the love of his life, she's spit out at 2. Her body changes, and she's a 2-year-old, and then she's there for 4 years. She's adopted by this lovely elderly couple, and they cherish her and spoil her. And the way Harry meets with her in the first book is his daughter. His adopted daughter is the librarian, and she wants to give the kids something to do in the summer, so she tells them a story. And actually, she coerces her father to come in there and tell a story. And every character in this book is patterned after somebody I know. And the librarian is patterned after my real daughter. And even the villains, you know, I know some folks, they make a great villain. And so I patterned them. So back to Kisses of My Enemy. And Dances of the Dragons, there are other books, so I'm kind of bringing you Kisses of My Enemy through these other books. Mm-hmm. Dances with My Dragon, it's how Harry is introduced to the witch Belle Rodham. And also, he loses Sarah. They are cast through time, and she winds up in 1,000 years ago in North Africa with a Berber king who's trying desperately to protect his people from ravaging hordes. So Sarah falls in love with this guy because he's also a dragon shifter mentor. He teaches her how to be who she is and introduces her to a manual called The Care and Training of Dragons. And the manual's a living book. It can actually talk to her. So she bonds with this book. The book is female, and she's having a wonderful time with this book. And that's Dances with My Dragon. Now, in the third book, Kisses of My Enemy, Harry has lost her because she feels like Harry's got a quest that he's trying to find out where his daughter is, Lizzie, the librarian, who he discovers really is his biological daughter. The only problem with that is he hasn't been with anybody, period.
Oh.
Like, so how can she be his biological daughter? Well, when he meets Belle Rodham, who's a Nazi assassin and a witch, he discovers that she biologically is the mother of Lizzie. And she doesn't like him. She don't want to be around him. She hates him, you know, and because she's a witch. But she's never met a man she couldn't seduce or destroy or dominate. But she runs into him. It's like hitting an oak tree. Pow. She can't hurt him. She can't bust him up. She can't change his heart. And she just kind of falls in love with him because she doesn't know what to do with him. He protects her. And not that she needs protecting, but she is so valuable to him that he cannot do anything less. So Kisses of My Enemy is how Belle Rodham and Harry come together. And there's a lot to it, and I don't want to spoil it. But in the end, Sarah comes back through time. And now she walks into the hospital room where Harry is recovering. And I'm not going to say any more about that. The fourth book is called Rivals. Belle Rodham and Sarah are rivals for Harry's affection. And he loves them both. And they become friends. And then I'm at 45,000 word count on that. And in the meantime, Lizzie has been brainwashed by the person who originally kidnapped her as an embryo. And now she is working to destroy Harry's legacy and people. And this gets convoluted. What happens is I get bored. And I start writing, and I write what I want to see. And I go, how the heck did I get there? How do I get out of here? And usually I do. And so basically, I entertain myself and other people like it. So was that anywhere near what you asked?
No, absolutely.
I felt like I went through a whole journey there.
Yeah.
Listening to that.
No, a lot of the authors that we asked, they don't summarize like the plot in that much detail, and it's just like it just sounds so unique because it has all those elements of like a smaller town family drama, and you know there's love emotions, and people are in the hospital, and there's regular troubles of life, but then there's dragons and
time travel
and Nazis involved.
Making it even more complicated.
Yeah,
like who's the dad and who's the mom, but then there's like the distance of time and of mythological creatures and all these different forces in play.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating.
Maybe just before we hop to the next official question, David, why the Berbers though? I'm curious, like why the specific people in place and time?
Well, he was an actual person. He was a king, and during that time, he was a Christian king, and he was a gallant man, an honorable man. And he gave his life for his people. So I did some historical research and found this guy. I thought, oh, wouldn't he be a nice person to visit? So that was one of the reasons that I chose him. He's part of the African culture, but he's not African. Not in the tribal sense, more like in the Bedouin sense, the Arab sense.
Right, yeah.
And but he's a man of honor and integrity. And I can't really give you any more. He's a really neat guy. And he's a dragon. And he gives her insight into who a dragon is. And the assumption is that dragons are bad. That's kind of what we walk into the world with. But that's not necessarily true, even from a biblical perspective. Now, I'm not saying from a Christian perspective because they are different. You hear the thunder in the background.
Yeah, actually.
Every time I start talking about dragons, it thunders, and I'm going, hey, what's going on?
Right on cue, right?
Yeah. You got to take advantage of those kind of things. So was that helpful?
Yes. I've actually read a little bit of Kisses of My Enemy. I just kind of dove right into the third installment there. But it's very cool that even though a lot is going on, you do keep this very unique sense of humor throughout. Like even the way that the sentences are structured and the way that you tell the story, it's still humorous, even though there's a lot of drama going on and a lot of fantasy elements. Which we could talk about.
Well, it's a reflection of who I am.
Yes.
Because, my father was an English teacher. My daughter's an English teacher. My wife's an English teacher. And I'm just rebellious by nature. If I didn't have two editors, you couldn't read it. Because it was so many misspellings. And they say, you don't say it like that. I said, I say it like that all the time. No. So, I'm getting there. But when you're asking about how it sounds, and that's one of the things when I read it out loud, I want it to sound right as well as read right. Does that make any sense?
Of course.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Do you find that your novel is a bit more of, like, do you write as if you think that you would read it out loud? Like, let's say if you go on a book tour or you go to the library and you read out loud to some readers, or are you thinking a bit more like traditionally of, like, people are just going to be reading this online as an ebook?
I don't think that's an either or proposition. And I don't know where I got this notion, but words have a rhythm, they have a flow. And if it sounds good when you read it out loud, chances are it'll read good when you're not reading out loud. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it seems to make sense. Yeah. And that's how I kind of like, because I love words. Finding the right one and describing things, and I'm not there yet. I can see a difference in the books, even as I write them, how hopefully they're improving the description. I had a friend of mine who took me to task over that. Don't tell the story, describe the story. And I said, I thought I did. And she said, no. So she goes through it, and she says, fluff this up a little bit. Show it to me. So was that helpful?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a hard line to walk for sure.
Yeah.
And there is the common advice of read your work out loud after you've completed a first draft and a first round of edits. And even if you want to, just have a traditional hard copy and you're not really, a storyteller in the vocal sense, it's still an important step of the way.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Yes. But when I was reading the excerpt, I just thought I could hear someone, recounting the story to me, like in a fire, like in a fire pit or something. It's just one of those stories. So
that's the intent of the whole. Thank you for being able to do that. I wanted you to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's your talent showing through, of course, of putting me in that space. So yeah, very well done.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and that's something that I'm trying to get a grip with too, is how much words can make you feel something as they relate even to your 5 senses or 6 senses, depends who you ask. We actually, so we read. I'm going to bring up the Lord of the Rings just right away because we cannot not talk about it, so we therefore must talk about it.
We do every episode.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we recorded a podcast over 2 years ago, and it's going to be released soon. It's been a long time coming. Where we discussed The Return of the King, it's one of my favorite books of all time, films of all time even, and in it we brought up the fact that at least like when you're reading or watching a film, they can describe smell, but they can't. You still don't have it. We don't have smell-o-vision yet. We don't have this 4th dimension where you go to a movie theater and the reek of dragon breath hits you and assaults your nostrils. We have almost everything else, and with 4D we also have shaking seats, so it kind of feels like maybe you're riding on the back of the dragon.
Sure.
And I just thought that Tolkien really used some interesting words in the book to represent different senses, and smell was a really big one. I think that was like. It was quite prominent. It was interesting how much he brought that up, and I think it's because he was in World War I, and that was probably horrific. And the reason, anyway, I wanted to tie that in to Tolkien being an author who was a Christian and a Roman Catholic, and we wanted to discuss where, like how you view your own genre. And this is where we're going to get into the next question, which is, David, your work is categorized under Christian fantasy from your online presence, and it's apparent that faith is a very important thing in your life. And can you tell us more about your relationship with religion, and specifically the role of Christianity in your fantasy stories?
Well, this is a balance. I have a person who's acting sort of like a functional agent. Michael Levin, you know him, I'm assuming.
Correct, yeah.
He suggested that I might find a larger audience if I move from Christian fantasy, don't change anything in the book, but change the genre. And so I'm weighing that back and forth. And it won't change what I write or how I write it or anything like that, but it'll just change the label. So I don't think that changes our conversation or your question, but I just wanted to share with you that it's not just Christian fantasy, because a lot of my readers are Christian and they are kind of offended a little bit, because every once in a while I'll cut one loose. I'll say a bad word, because, when you're being devoured by flame, you're probably not going to say, "Oh my goodness." You're just not going to do it. I don't care how pious you are. You're going to say something. And dragons are bad. They're going to say bad things. Some of them are. The villains are. The good guys aren't. And it's funny, though. Sarah's grandmother, who's one of the heroes in the first book, she has a thing about cussing. She does not want people to do that. So she gets on Sarah's case about it. And that's why I came up with this phrase that some words are a vowel short of a cuss word. You say shoot, you don't use an I. And that's how I use the phrase. Well, that's a vowel short of a cuss word. But, it's the intent of the heart. So how did I get off on cussing? I'm sorry. You were asking about Christianity and my faith.
No worries.
It is related.
Yeah, I went from smell-o-vision to Tolkien to Christianity. So this is how these things go.
You're my kind of people, man. We can talk about anything. So what was the question?
Religion and spirituality, not even necessarily Christianity, but just how those things influence your storytelling and morals and that kind of thing.
Well, I grew up a Baptist preacher's kid, and in spite of that, I still developed a relationship with Christ. And then I discovered some amazing supernatural phenomenon, like I had been taught, because of our particular religious system, that those things went out with the apostles. Okay. But when you meet a witch, it changes your theology, especially when she's capable of casting spells and causing problems. And then when the witch, and I did. Then I discovered that not only does she have power, but I have power that I didn't realize I had. Okay. And this is not about philosophy. This is about pragmatic life, because I'm a skeptic by nature. But how many miracles do you have to see before you start to believe? And even then, I'm skeptical of the miracles. Lee Strobel, I don't know if you're acquainted with that author. He wrote a book. He was an investigative journalist whose wife became a Christian, and he hated it. I didn't like that. So he set out to refute Christianity, and in the process became a Christian, investigative journalist. He used that same mindset after becoming a Christian to investigate the miraculous, the supernatural. And what he discovered there were fakes. He discovered there is embellishment. But then there are things that are real. And when you see an x-ray of somebody that you prayed over, and what they had, they no longer have, and the doctor says, "Hey, this is real." When you see the demon cast out, you see things move. You see a smell go through a room, and you know it wasn't you. When you see, yeah, there is that authenticity to me. And, it's the phenomenon. And you go back and say, this is the 21st century, but it feels like the first century. That makes this real and powerful. And all of a sudden, when you have a mind worldview change, when you actually read the scriptures, you go, oh my gosh, I never saw that before. But there are a lot of people who have not had that eye-opening experience with supernatural phenomenon. And so it's lost on them. That breaks my heart because, without the passion of the supernatural, Jesus said, if you don't believe me, believe the works I do. And when you've seen it, you're never the same. And so that comes through in my writing. I kind of limited myself to only writing about things that I can find at least an implication of in the Bible. And dragons are all over Job 41. There is a fire-breathing dragon in Job 41. It's called Leviathan. All right, man, we got our dragons. I can talk about dragons.
Right.
They're witches. All right. There are mediums. Whew. There are shape changers. And you're thinking, where's that one? The serpent in the garden was a shapeshifter. When Moses had a rod and it started out a wooden stick and it turned into a snake, that's shapeshifting. It's all over the place. But after you've experienced the supernatural phenomenon, then all of a sudden your eyes are open and you see things through a whole different perspective. Was that what you were asking me? Did I even answer the right question?
Oh, and then some. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were raised Roman or Catholic, right? Not Roman Catholic. But
Yeah, like Roman Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have some knowledge of this.
Yeah, definitely. And like though I'm no longer, I don't consider myself religious really at all anymore, but I've been very spiritual, I suppose. When you say supernatural, the closest thing that I think relate to, at least personally, is things I've experienced when I've been like alone or meditating or like I'll go for a little hike or something, and you start to put together certain things that have happened to you or just that about the world, and you kind of have that sense that there's just so much more than just what we see with our own eyes, and even interdimensionally. Like the first time that I ever heard string theory and the multiverse theory, that really blew my mind. I just thought, oh, that's crazy that there could be infinite variations of us having this conversation, and in one universe I might be wearing a ball cap, in the other one she looks like, I don't know, a fire-breathing dragon sitting next to me. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
Not much different than
And
right now.
I'm not touching that with that.
Yeah. Her words, not mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll kind of round it off. We last summer we went to Sri Lanka for me for the first time. She was obviously born there, and upon me, being a North American for the first time ever out of North America. I've only been to Canada, in other parts of Canada and the U.S., and to leave, to go to a different continent, different culture entirely. When we landed, I go, man, the energy is just completely different here. And my sensibilities about things change. I noticed that there's different, like I was thinking differently, and even though we were on vacation and having fun, and it was all, again, to me, very new and indeed exotic, I still felt like, man, like you can tell that there, for thousands of years, there's been people here who believe in these immensely spiritual things, and indeed it's a much more religious and spiritually oriented society, certainly than here in North America. And I think it brought up something that maybe as a kid I definitely felt. It was really developed when I was a kid. I believe many parts of the Bible were literal history, and it's so fascinating, and it's so hard to describe what these feelings are. And I find it fascinating that you speak about it so candidly, but like you've also said that you integrate what you know and understand about those things into your works. And I think a lot of times in fantasy, a lot of people, they'll take what they think is a mystical experience or a spiritual one, or what they think an encounter with a god or a goddess or an otherworldly being would be like, but having never really felt something like that in themselves.
If you ever read my books and you encounter the North Star, there he is, the dragon rider king, And he goes by other names as well. And you will kind of get a glimpse into my understanding of the Lord God, because he serves some sweet tea. He dances with Sarah. He understands. He laughs. He pushes Harry into a stream. He just pushes him, and he lands in the water, and then he goes through time. And he receives one of the major characters when they die, and he embraces them. And that is, when you've experienced that, it's easier to write about. You don't have to make up a God. You just reflect the one you know. Mm-hmm. And so I am very respectful of the residue that you experienced in Shangri-La. Not Shangri-La. What was the place?
Sri Lanka.
That's a mystical, wonderful place. You're not from there, are you?
The Shangri-La is a few blocks that way from us.
I'm sorry, man. I'm East Texan. I can use my Shangras.
No worries.
If you want to visit a weird place, you need to come to our house.
Yeah.
East Texas is a culture, and it's more Texan than American. It's pledge allegiance to the Republic of Texas. So it's a different world, but I do appreciate what you're sharing. I do, really do.
And if I could chip in, my family is Buddhist, so I grew up in a Buddhist family, so the idea of like energy and miracles happening is kind of in Buddhist philosophy or religious sort of ideas as well, in the form of karma and like the movement of energy and how. So in Buddhism, the way that you think about something will affect the real world. So what energy you put out into the world or into your mind is going to affect other people. So if it's going to increase suffering or reduce suffering, that's what you have control over. It's, in a way, it sounds very supernatural. And
yes, it does.
Yeah, and a lot of religion is that way. And it always interests me when there are people who, identify as religious, but then they look at the supernatural or anything that's supernatural and say that that's, the devil or is the work of some, of a darker force.
Yeah, like a trickery, or it's temptation, or it's some sort of it's assaulting your mind or trying to test your faith. And I definitely, even when I was growing up, I felt like that just couldn't be the case, right? Like It can't be that there's just there's just
evil forces. There has to be an opposing force that is just as powerful, but good,
exactly.
Yeah, you're touching on the concept of the difference between defilement and glory. We're more acquainted with defilement. For instance, there's not an individual, specifically women, who have not had a man look at them in such a way as they feel dirty and they will need to go home and take a bath. That sense of just being looked at like that by a creepy person, it leaves us with that is defilement. There are various levels of it. Mm-hmm. That is why people get into a lot of immorality. They kind of grow darker and darker. And that's how they begin to identify themselves as that. And that is why when you meet the North Star, there is such a pureness that is not condemnation, because we already live with that. He relieves that condemnation. But we're not acquainted with glory. And one of the things that I've tried a couple of times to convey in my writing is the concept of glory, of what it really feels like to enter into the presence of the holy. And you go, damn, that's what you do. Yeah. You just go, oh my gosh. And that's what I try to convey and make that distinction. I believe people that read fantasy are seekers. They're looking. And I'm trying to be gracious and meet them where they're at and create a hunger that will keep them looking even when they finish reading my books, and not be so preachy that they think, oh, he's just a preacher. Nah. I need to leave a taste in their mouth. See, in the book of Proverbs, it says, raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they'll not return from it. What it describes is that when a little baby was little and he couldn't eat regular food, the mother would chew the food up in her own mouth, and she'd take it and she'd put it in theirs. Take a bit of what you're tasting and place it on the lips of others, and they'll be drawn to what you love. And so that's what I'm trying to do in my books.
Same as Tolkien's, I guess, adage or attribution, which is you should write the stories that you want to read, you know?
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, and I'm only, I think, just beginning to understand what that really means. And I've definitely read a lot of novels, though, where it was not the story that the author wanted to write, but they thought that they should write. And that's a whole other thing. And I mean, I shouldn't be one to judge because I've never published a book, but I think, you know, as writers or, you know, novelists, very, again, analytical, and I think just prone to self-doubt and wanting to prevent mistakes from even happening before you make them, lest you learn anything from them, right? So, yeah.
You quit meddling now. I mean, you've quit preaching and gone to meddling. Are you acquainted with that expression? That when a preacher's just preaching general stuff, and then he goes off and he gets very specific, and you're going, let me out of here. You just did that. And that's very good. Very good. You're talking about risk.
Yeah.
I've met some readers online or writers online who never publish because it's not perfect. And the truth is they're just afraid of being rejected.
Yeah.
And those 1-star reviews are bad. You know, I've had a few of them going, Dad, gum. But the 5-star reviews that are written by people you've never met and love your work, that makes up for it.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
I think so.
But you understand that, don't you?
Hopefully.
You really do.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with 1-star reviews is that I don't know, like I haven't published anything. I'm one of those people who I am still working on a novel that I've been working on for a long time, but it's because I started writing as a kid, so I need to bring it up to the age that I am, basically. I love the story, so I don't want to let it go. But for me, like, I almost welcome 1-star reviews, like, in my head. Right now. Because it means that people cared enough to read it. And I mean, if it's a constructive 1-star, if it's like, there's no dogs in this novel, if it's like a crappy,
if it's hate, that's not useful, right?
Yeah. But if it's a constructive 1 or 2-star review and they tell you why they didn't like it, and of course it's up to subjective taste, but if they actually care to leave you a review where they tell you what they think, I mean, that's almost as good as people loving it, because people care about the work. And for me, that, you know, they care enough about people reading this book to give their 2 cents, and for me that's valuable too. It's not just about creating a purely positive response out of people. For me,
so that sounds really good. But it doesn't feel that way when you get it. But you're right. I agree with you intellectually, but my heart says,
Yeah. No, I totally understand, and I'd put that caveat of I've never experienced it, so I'm just throwing out my ivory tower thoughts on it. So.
But it's a good thought. It really is, and it's the way things ought to be. I've got that. You're right. Indeed. What else is on your heart?
Well, when you were talking about glory, I think the closest book that I've read to completion that gave me that sense was Lord of the Rings, in terms of just that pure earnestness of, you know, he didn't necessarily install Christianity into Middle Earth, but a lot of the concepts and ideas of Christianity really informed the story. And so the concept of Valinor, or like these absolute beings who like just know so much and know everything about the world that they've created, but they're still flawed in a way. Those phenomena in the book really spoke to me of like this is wondrous, you know. It's not something that you can find with your senses in our reality, but you know that there's some sort of truth to it in a way.
Well, hang on to that thought. You said it's not something we can find in our reality with our senses. I have. Not with my books, but in heavy worship. You say, well, that's just emotion. Well, that discredits emotion as being a qualifier of reality. And the problem is that we don't celebrate our intellect near as much as we celebrate our passion. You know, when a child is born, we're just excited. We're not thinking about formulas and logic and matrices. And when your son hits a home run and they look at you and you're screaming your full head off and they're saying, "We can tell whose boy that is." And you go, "Yeah." I mean, that's an amazing thing. So, but in a lot of churches I've been a part of, they discredit passion. They discredit emotions. And yet it's part of it. And there's another assumption that goes with it. The assumption is that the intellect is not nearly as tainted or subject to corruption as our passions, our emotions, and that is silly. You know, academia is noted for stupid. You know, they just do some stupid things, and they're so intellectual and they're so brilliant, and yet they don't know which side of the commode to pee on. I mean, it's like, golly, man. So I'm not, giving that a lot of credit. You can mess up with your head and your heart. And so one of the things they're going to put on my gravestone, it's going to be big because it's going to have a lot of these sayings on it, is when your heart's right, your head will get there eventually. And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. We're
having a good time.
Yeah. This is
definitely. Yeah. I think that's huge. Like it's such a big just piece of life advice, which is, you can be as rational as you want, but at the end of the day, if you feel like in your heart like just miserable, what good is all the rationality and logic?
Yes.
I think, David, you kind of pointed out to this, that rationality protects us from our emotions sometimes, because we are afraid to go into our emotions, and it's because it's a very deep well. We kind of want to push aside how we feel about certain things, and being human, it's all about living in those emotions. And sometimes we just don't want to look at them. But it's also about the fact that your emotions can be tainted in a way, or there's this sort of idea that your emotions can be influenced by different forces in the world, whether they're spiritual or other people or advertising or whatever it is.
Right.
But the fact that it's very subjective frightens people, as opposed to the supposed objectiveness of logic. And that has been passed down through history from the Enlightenment era, basically. But I think people are slowly starting to wake up from that. And I think we're learning that a lot in the self-isolation that we're in, too, of like the economy and all the logic that runs our world is...
Supposedly.
Yeah. So, like, it's come to a standstill, and what we have left are our emotions and our day-to-day domestic life. And we really have to sit and take that in now.
It's fascinating because we're seeing a lot of people who are indeed close to us, but also all our favorites that we follow online or whatnot. And there's folks who are really enjoying this time. It is a nice break and a hard reset in a way.
As introverts.
as nerds and introverts who do indeed read and watch Netflix at home all day, play video games, whatever else. And then there's folks who are really losing it, and it's because they're so used to the external world, if that makes sense. Like they need the stimulation of other people, and they want to be able to go out and connect with others. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not a complete shut-in, but I understand that, and I miss seeing people and hanging out with we have a friend group that we play Dungeons and Dragons with, and we haven't been able to meet for the last 2 or 3 weeks just because of the whole this whole thing, and it sucks. I think that to round this off is it's showing that I know I ramble.
It's great.
It's showing, I think, the degree to which society has a fixation with satisfying emotions that don't really, like, what is your identity actually based on? And there's people right now who aren't working. People, that's a killer. Like, it's just their whole life and identity and what they think their purpose is on Earth is around a job, and I just go, man, there's just so much more to it than just how you make your bucks and how you make your bread. Like, this is probably apparent. You know, I'm still thinking about this very deeply, and I don't quite know, but I think there's a lot that's come from reading fantasy that's made this time more bearable, and we can see it in a more kind of mature way. And funny enough, we needed fantasy to do that.
There's that Gandalf quote of, I can't remember it verbatim, but basically, we can't control what time we're born in, but we can control what we do with our time. And I think that's an important thing to consider today.
I like wizards.
Yeah.
There are some contemporary people like that. They're not called wizards, they're called prophets. Wait till you guys meet a real one.
Yeah.
They're not just hellfire and damnation kind of people. That's when you hear prophet, you think Old Testament, that's what they do. And that tells me you haven't read the Old Testament. But the real prophetic is also coming through in some of my writing.
Yeah.
And especially in the next series. I really don't want to say goodbye to Harry Ferguson Chronicles, and that may go on for a long time because I love the characters. But eventually, there's something called the Haunted Prophets that are coming up. And there's a guy that's contemporary. He's going to live in the same little community that Harry did. And I don't even have a name for him yet. But he's going to have gifts, supernatural gifts, and be discovering them and have to struggle with his own spirituality, and it's going to be hard, but he's going to use them to deal with the dark. And like his first client is a ghost, and you know he's put out a classified ad and said, you know, we'll de-haunt your house and you know, get rid of all the spooks. And he's sleeping one night. There's a knock at the door. He goes and answers it. And there's this guy, he's dressed kind of funny, like 1890s look, but it's East Texas and a lot of things go. And he says, you know, I've got a problem in my house, and can you help me? And find out that the ghost has come seeking help. So that's a twist. That's the Haunted Prophets. And I'm 2 years away from the first book. I haven't even written the first word. And it's also going to have a couple of characters from the church I attend in it. One is a little old lady. When I say little old lady, I mean it in every stretch of the imagination. She has a bun on her head. You know, it's about the size of your fist. And she's always wearing a bun. And at times when I just want to pick her up and see if she spins. And one, oh, you will have to meet her. You will. Yeah. Her name is Tony Steele. That's her real name. And one of our best friends is a retired Ranger Colonel, Special Forces, big as a bear. He's had PTSD because he's been blown up twice. I think they put his brain in backwards the last time, but I love it. And he and she get along great. Now, she will shake her finger at him, and he cringes. She's half his size. And she says, and you know, so on the front cover of this book is little Miss Tony and Big Will. And I said, Will, I need names for these characters. And Will Conley is the name of the colonel. So that's easy. I said, okay. So what do we call Miss Steele? We call her Buns. I said, okay. And what are we going to call your character? He says, Bear. Bear Knuckles. So we have Buns and Knuckles. I said, that's right. And then he said, but you know what else? He said, the first book, you can call it Buns of Steel. I said, that is not going to happen. She will kill us. And so she found out about it, and she jumped all over us. Buns of Steel and Bare Knuckles. She said, do not do that. So Will made her a promise. I said, okay, we will not use S. It'll be Bun, Steel Bun or something. I said, all right. And then he looked at me and he winked. I thought, okay. And so later on, he got together and said, you know, a Z sounds a whole lot like an S. And I went, what? Buns of Steel. So we're going to keep it, and she's going to kill us. Anyway, that's the new series coming out eventually. So I knew that was one of the questions, and it was on my heart, so I just threw it out there.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Talked a bit about dragons and your sort of incorporation of dragons into your stories. And I read one of your Facebook posts called Why Dragons, and you discuss how you did some research into dragons and biblical texts, and how you had a moral sort of conflict about keeping them in your stories. And you mentioned that quite a few of them are villains, but there's also the good dragon shapeshifters.
That was a really nice treatise to read. So.
Yes.
Well, good.
Yeah, so
thank you.
What's your process in figuring out what you should or want to write about in your stories, and other subjects that you wouldn't ever touch?
I think I've already kind of alluded to this a little bit when the concept of defilement and glory. The story will dictate what the characters kind of have to do and have to be. But no, out there's kind of a trend in some kind of in paranormal fantasy of having villains with a good side and bad people with a bad side. And I know that nobody's straight one way or the other. But what it also does is give people a confusion. They're thinking nobody is good. Good does not exist. It doesn't wear a white hat. Well, no, it doesn't. It's a camouflage hat, and it says Minneola Community Bank on it. But there are that struggle with how do you reflect the authentic, and what don't you touch? I think it's not the subject matter so much as how you approach it.
Right. And
if people understand defilement, and I think we do, unless we are so darkened by our behavior or our attitudes that we can no longer really fathom something that is not good from something that is. And there are people like that. They touch the darkness so often they've become dark. And you read about that and you see that in the movies. This detective has been chasing a serial killer and he's gotten into his mind and now he can't get out of it.
Right, yeah.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
And that the truth of the matter is that people who say they don't believe in God, that's not really true. The problem is they don't like the God they believe in. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yeah.
Twisted and corrupt nature is why there's so many gods and goddesses and fantasies, because we're trying to fashion them into our own image, because the image we think of the most holy is not what we think it really is. We don't see God as good. We don't see him as good, and so therefore we're looking for something else. The truth of the matter is that we're not seeing him accurately. And so when you say, is there anything you won't touch, it's how you touch it. It's how you frame it. And I know there are a lot of worldviews out there in conflict today, and people are saying all kind of things about subjects that would 75 years ago never even been considered. And it will only continue to escalate, like the reverse harem books. Isn't that a dandy? The harem books. We've gotten into polygamy, so monogamy is no longer, a good thing. And I'm thinking, that's fine as long as you're not one of the kids. And I asked y'all, have you noticed the covers of the books? And I did a survey just for you, because you've always got this guy out there with the abs, with the boobs, and if you got abs and boobs, man, you can have a great book. Well, I actually looked at the best-selling fiction, regardless of genre. You have to go down to the 78th book before you find an ab. I'm going, really? And then in epic fantasy, it was 34. Where you start finding titles like My Baby Daddy's Dragon Shifter's Mama, or whatever. It's out there. You're laughing, but it's true because you've seen it. And like ab, boob. Ab, boob, ab. I'm going, crap, they all look alike to me.
Oh, my.
And I'm going, is there anything out there that feeds a different part of me? You mentioned it earlier. There's a shallowness, and that people are discovering how shallow they are. Well, I want to create a longing for something whole.
It's an impulse that I think we definitely share, Shalini and I, is wholeness. It's not really something, though, I think that you can just claim or at some point just realize. I think it's more like a set of practices or your actions, I guess. If that makes sense. Yeah, that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
It's good.
It's neat that you brought that up. I noticed that now, what is it called? Because we have a different chain here in Canada. So in Canada we have Indigo as our big, Barnes and Noble is the one in the U.S. Oh. Yeah, and if you go in and you go to the fantasy section, you go, man, like there's so many of it where they deliberately make the characters all very attractive, and they focus on how hot the character is. And I go, well, it's great to get someone's eyes on it, but is there any substance to the story? Is is it just about some hot witch or something, or I don't know. Sure. E.G. Stone interview, you showed the cover for, I can't remember which book it was, but you showed the cover and it's got a dragon drinking a Coca-Cola or something, and then there's Cheetos. Yeah, and okay. And I thought that's such a curveball that someone like me would just go, I'm picking, because you'll see the abs, swords. Everyone's beautiful, and then you see dragon with Cheetos and Coke, and then two people at a table, and I go, like, what is that? Like, please let me read I'm going to immediately pick that one up and read the back of it. Do you have like a philosophy or some sort of special take on cover art specifically?
Oh man, I am evolving or devolving, because you just mentioned the cover that I changed 3 times. I love that cover. It's a scene in the book, and I thought, this is wonderful, but nobody else liked it. And I'm going, gosh, you're the first people that actually like it. I love you too. You're awesome, man. You like my cover. So I switched it to something that somebody else said, this will be better. And of course, it's got a guy with a sword and a lovely lady and a dragon in the background. I'm thinking, I really don't like this cover. And and somebody else said, we really don't like that cover. And I'm going, geez. So the third one, I've got a lot of people saying, that's a beautiful cover. It's a sword with a midnight background speckled with stars. It's beautiful. But now they're saying, but it doesn't go with the rest of your books. And I'm going, so you're asking the wrong person, man. Yeah. I don't know.
Sometimes it's not up to the author or the writer about what the cover should be, which is, to me, it's crazy, because
I want to do my own cover. I don't want someone else to just come up with.
But it's also it's your book, right? Like it's your essence, like in the pages. But then the cover that people see, it's the first impression, is not yours, and you might not even be happy with it. And you don't even think that it reflects your style, your voice, or even the contents of the book properly.
And we are 100% a society that judges book by the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I've never seen otherwise, so like that's a big piece
for sure. And I think that's why there's this proliferation of washboard abs and boobs on the covers, because people think that because that's this trend, that's what we have to do to be part of that trend. But people don't realize, like, once a thing is oversaturated, then it has the opposite effect of people don't care about it anymore.
What I was actually told was that your cover should fit in. And then what I was actually told was your cover should stick out. How do you fit in and stick out at the same time?
Yeah,
that's beyond me. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's indie publishing. I have the option of changing my covers. And there's still people that want to change my covers. I'm thinking, I'm not so sure I'm going to change my covers. But
I mean, you can never make anyone happy, right? So you might as well go with what you believe is right and what your book is about. So I think you should keep the dragon with the Coke if that's still an option.
I will send you a copy of that older version with that cover if you guys want it. I will mail it to you to make you happy.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. This is over. Send me your address and I'll put it in the mail.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you want to do?
Where do we want to go from here?
Where do you want to go with here?
Enjoyed this so much, but we've chased so many rabbits that I feel like I'm out in the field surrounded by rabbits and I don't know which way to go now. I can tell you about an anthology. E.G. Stone and I were talking, and she's kind of incorporated some other writers, and we're writing an anthology of short stories about the virus. And I actually lived through one of those short stories. I was in an organic food store, and E.G. and I are arm wrestling over this story, by the way, because she thinks I'm being offensive and culturally insensitive. But I told her, I'm redneck, honey. What do you mean to do? Mm-hmm. So I'm in the organic food store, and I walk in there to get some ginseng. Is that the way you say it? Ginseng, some kind of herb. And it's the first time, we're in the first weeks of this coronavirus thing, and everybody's got a mask. And I'm going, dang, I'm in a zombie movie. How the heck did I get here? and I'm watching, and the cashiers have gloves on. I'm going, golly, and I'm getting nervous, you know. And the shelves are empty, but there's this little chirp going all through the place. They're buzzing like happy hippies with their little ponytails and all. And you know, I'm sitting there in my overalls and my camouflage cap, and going, but I'm there because I like the place. I do. And all of a sudden, you hear this cough. And it's not like somebody just coughed and goes, excuse me. It's like they're hacking up a fur ball. I mean, it's coming out of the back, and it's loud, and it's angry, and they're just coughing and coughing and going. And the whole place gets quiet, like a blanket of cold has descended. And you're going, ooh, this is scary. And all of a sudden, you hear this screech out of the back. It says, virus! And there is a stampede. Oh. People are throwing their babies in baskets, man. You're getting run over. I had steel-toe boots on. Otherwise, my feet would have been crushed. And it's like, oh, my gosh. And it's just awful. And then over the microphone, over the speakers, stop. And people go, he's choking on a dried string bean. It's okay. And there's just kind of a giggle that goes throughout the place. And people look around, they're thinking they're stupid. So I'm in the cashier's line now. I'm getting out of there. I don't have a mask on. The little old lady in front of me doesn't have a mask on. And she's relieved that I don't have a mask on. And she looks at me and she says, I'm so glad you don't have a mask on. And I want you to know the devil got a hold of me. I looked back at her and said, I don't have to. I've already got the virus.
Oh my God.
That was terrible. And anyway, Jay and I are wrestling over that one. She thinks it's inappropriate, but I don't know. What do y'all think?
I think that's hilarious. And
yeah, no,
I'd love to see a story.
Yeah. All, like, in some sense, had that. We've experienced that. I mean, at least where we live, I don't think the panic was at first so bad, but because we, I think, deliberately stayed away from places where we knew that would happen. Mm-hmm. Where my family lives out in Ontario, people were a lot more panicky and
the suburban area, so they just go and buy everything out of Whole Foods and Sobeys and all that. So it's just it's really weird, and we're in a higher density area, and we're way more likely to get it. I think it's the West Coast sensibility here is. People are just chilling. They're like, yeah, I'm a healthy person. I probably won't get it. It's a younger population more here on average. And people are like at the beach. They're running. They're doing their daily jog. So it's a very interesting thing of seeing how people react to it.
And some of it I don't like that there's still people going out and jogging and going to the beach because that's not what we should be doing right now. But
yeah, they'll get the virus, have no symptoms, and give it to some old person and kill them.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
And maybe we can talk a bit about this, David, is how characters how they have agency, and there is definitely a tendency to show, especially with a lot of dark fantasy recently, like the most notable being Game of Thrones, which is a really good TV series overall, and we've read a few of the novels, and it gets pretty dark, and it is, I think, the epitome of the gray morality spectrum, like how there's never really a good or a bad character, but I think at certain points it does, like you say, get confusing where you go, I don't even know what to think about this person anymore, just because such a wild card in terms of what they do, or the way that they react to certain pressures or scenarios, especially in that kind of story where it's very political and there's lots of peril and it's a giant war and whatnot. We'll start with it's just a basic question and we can go from there. But do you have any characters that you think really straddled the line, and do you enjoy or find those kinds of characters interesting or I guess respectable in that sense?
Yeah, there's one. Out of all my characters, there's one who is evil. He's a fallen angel. He is Nephilim. And yet, he is not as wicked as the Nazi scientists that are around him trying to use his... now, hey, what's wrong with having a Nazi scientist? It's time travel.
Yeah.
I had to pick a villain that everybody thought was a villain, and I could have picked a Democrat, but that wouldn't have gone over. So I used a Nazi. Y'all forgive me, it came out. I'm so sorry, slipped right out.
We're Canadians. It's all.
That's true. Yeah, you don't have a dog in that hunt, do you? Okay, good. Anyway, back to Cadmus. Cadmus is his name. He's taken from Greek mythology. And Cadmus, the first time you meet him, he's diabolical. And then he starts to remember who he was way back in the day, like Noah's Ark day. And again, my analogies are from Scripture and the Bible and things like that. And and there's a little blurb in the book of Genesis that said, the sons of God saw the daughters of men and thought they were beautiful and married them, or had intercourse with them. I don't remember which it is. And they were called the Nephilim. And so Cadmus is one of those original creatures. And he's watched humanity. And right now he's caught up with the Nazis. But he's looking at how severe their oppression is. And he's been a part of empires falling and rising through the ages. And in the end, and here's just a spoiler, Cadmus meets a Catholic priest in the Nazi prison camp. Now, I don't know if you know the true story of Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish priest who, as a child, he had a vision, and God offered him 2 crowns, a red one or a white one. And he said, I'll take them both. One crown was purity, the other was martyrdom. And so he took those as his destiny. So he's in this Holocaust prison. They're killing him through starvation. That's how he died. He gave his life. But in the cell, and this is truth, where he actually died, the Nazi guards were watching, and there was such a residue of the holy and glory coming out of that cell where he was being starved with these other men, and they would sing praises to God. They were honor the Lord. And then the Nazis got to where they didn't want to get around them because they were afraid of them. And Cadmus is going to run into that, and it's going to remind him of who he is. See, that is the essence of becoming an authentic individual. We meet up with a standard, with a person who reminds us of who we really are and calls us by name. And that's the North Star, and he's known by other names. And so that's coming out. That is how Rivals, that's in the book, the 4th book that I'm writing now. The 5th book is when I told you Harry loses somebody very near and dear to him, and I'm not going to mention her name. And he's in conflict because the North Star had promised him they'd be together. And how can they be? So, I don't know why I got off on that tirade, but it was fun. What did you ask me? I can't remember what you asked me.
I don't even remember what you asked. What did you ask?
What did I ask?
Oh, yes, the neutral.
It doesn't even matter.
Yes, thank you. It was a great question.
Yeah. No, not a problem. Pleasure.
Morally great characters, and if you have any stories, yes.
My particular problem is I'm wrapped up in too many narratives where those characters exist, and so maybe I'm getting too used to them. Mm. Feature in my book, and I won't talk at length about it because I feel like I should be writing it more than talking about it, kind of thing. But I just I don't know. Maybe I'll just move on to something else.
Come on, tell us. I want to hear this.
Well, yeah, I have a few characters that I want them to kind of go through a journey where they become redeemable, because I find redemption is a really great theme in fantasy, and I really love it. And even in really dark grim kind of fantasy stories. I find that redemption stories bring that idea of purity or of becoming whole again, to use that same kind of analogy. I think, and Shalini has also brought this up, I think at least in one or two interviews, where there's a tendency in some fantasy to, in order for a character to go through the redemption story arc, they have to just go through the absolute worst things imaginable. Like, they need to go through, like, sexual violence, they have to lose their whole families, they have to lose their spouse or something. Does redemption always entail a character going through the worst things imaginable? Or can we have characters go through some hardship, but they've always essentially been a good person, they just didn't really know it, or they just never had a chance to show it, as opposed to them being a dirtbag or someone who's just very unlucky, and then all of a sudden they're a guardian angel after going through terrible hell?
A lot of that depends on the character and how they react to the tribulation in their life. Because the same thing that will make a Mother Teresa or a Buddha will also make a Hitler or some other type of villain. There is a reaction to our circumstances that determines the road we take. And that reaction, I believe, is empowered by one of two powers external to that individual. The darkness, which is an entity, which we call Satan. He has come to kill, to steal, and to destroy. And he very much shows up in the Landon Lang, who's a counterfeit clergy in my books. I mean, he's there, this demon-possessed guy. And the other is in Christ. The atonement, the cross of Jesus Christ, was where the wrath of God was taken out. And he suffered so that we would not have to endure that. And that is the distinction that I try to make in my books. Although I'm not talking about Jesus in my books, I really am. I'm all around it, and I just don't name him.
Right.
And the absolution through vicarious suffering of an individual or another. And only God could do that. I mean, if Christ was not God, then his death was absolutely meaningless. It just was a nice man died. But if he was, then that blood shed has the power to change a heart. And that is the distinction. I believe light is in all religions. I believe that with all my heart. But I also believe the tendency of humanity is to ignore the light we have, regardless of our upbringing, and cling to darkness. But I also believe this, that an individual who has a taste for the light will constantly be seeking more light, and more light, and more light. And so I think, to answer your question, that individual's journey will be how they react when they are faced with those traumas, what their natural inclination is. This is going to sound heretical, but maybe not to y'all, because y'all don't know enough about what heresy is. But I'm not sure every person, sentient, bipedal, opposable thumb walking person is human. And I'm not saying that by virtue of race or creed. I just think there's beasts among us who have only been selfish, have an insatiable need for, to gratify the flesh. Mm-hmm. And they're just, even their good things are so embellished with selfishness that, man. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But I haven't been convinced of that yet.
So, like, what I got from your question was, specifically in Game of Thrones, like, we've talked at length and struggled with the sort of trials and tribulations that certain characters go through to find the ending of their story. I don't know have you watched or read Game of Thrones?
Some of it.
Okay.
There are parts of it that I don't need to be watching.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult thing, because at first everyone was like, oh, this is so revolutionary. This is what everyone wants out of fantasy, is like the realism of life. And now I don't think that many people think about the story that way, at least the TV show, because the way that they went through, you know, the conflicts and the trials of the characters, instead of it showing, you know, the strength of the characters or their behavior towards it, or you know, whether it's good or bad, that was irrelevant after a while, because it was just the shock value.
It was just suffering, right?
Yeah, and for some reason we find suffering entertaining to watch. Not everyone, but you know, it's kind of like a universal human thing. Same with the abs and the boobs. It's it's something that you know, appeals to some part of our psyche. And so by the end of it, I was just like, was this even necessary? And the sort of twists of some characters who needed redemption, like Jaime Lannister, because he started off as a very, you know, I don't care about anyone else except me and mine. And you see the sort of redemption arc for him, and it was, you know, very satisfying to watch. But then at the end of the show, spoiler, but he goes back to his selfish ways, and he rejects redemption. And the thing about that is, I think that's a valuable thing to have in a story, is some people aren't ready for redemption. But in his case, he was ready for it. It was just they just wanted that shock value of, oh, look, he had all these options, but in reality, he was just a terrible person from the beginning. Like, he was a rotten egg from the beginning. And that's not a satisfying story at all, because there's no... Even if it might be realistic because it's so tragic, even I don't believe that either. There's just nothing to hold on to.
Sure. Do you think a person who doesn't believe in hope can write about it? There are a lot of people out there who've given up on hope, who've given up on redemption, who've given up on good. They don't believe in whole. And as a result of that, their writing reflects that lack of hope. Yeah. And so why would they offer something they don't know how to hold? Yeah. And, you know, inevitably it'll come out in your writing, is who you are and what you believe. And we can reflect the human condition, but can we offer anything beyond that? And that is, here's another thing. Our hearts, the essence of who we are, is like a tuning fork. And it recognizes truth. It resonates to truth. Now, you can put a lot of gunk on it and cause that heart to not be as capable of recognizing truth. But every once in a while, you'll hear something and you'll leap. You go, yes, or it'll cause you to feel alive. And I believe that the human heart is a tuning fork. And it longs for and knows truth when it senses it and feels it. There's so many of us that have a tuning fork out of whack, that it doesn't vibrate real well, and we're around somebody else and that's not vibrating really well, and well, is that truth? And then, you know, you see something beyond that, and your heart does vibrate, because that's how we are made. You know, we are made in the image of the holy, and we recognize it when we see it. Now, our pride gets in the way, our culture gets in the way, our experience gets in the way. I was reared in a very rigid culture, guys. Oh, man, they're going to hell. I'm going, well, I don't think so. And you have to struggle with all that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I've come to the place where if you can touch wholesome, and you can touch truth, and you can just for a moment know the glory, you're never the same. It ruins you. I'm hoping this resonates with you.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. We talked about the idea of not being preachy.
Sure.
It's almost like those folks writing and they don't have that hope, or they're just not interested in it. In a way, that itself is also being preachy.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Very
I think I'm starting to wrap. You can see visually I'm wrapping my head around this now.
Yeah, sure. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
You have a gift, by the way. there's so much in you, and it's going to come out as you grow older, and both of you as a couple. Just by the way, this is called a prophecy. I'm prophesying over you. There's a teacher in you. There is somebody who can synthesize material, and you can speak truth. You know how to communicate, and you're also so compassionate that they feel the compassion coming from you, and they're drawn to you, and you make a wonderful two-edged sword as a couple. And you're encouraging. You're by nature, you're encouragers. You know how to say the right word at the right time. And I think you're also open to the light and the truth, and that will drive your journey. There'll be moments when you say, just leave me alone, but it won't, because he knows our name and calls us to himself. See, the North Star doesn't lie. And you guys have marks. You are marked, and you're called, and I just want to bless you. It's been a pleasure being with you today. I hope we can get together again.
Thank you, David. Absolutely. Yeah, we feel the same. It's been a real pleasure, and
this is probably one of the most special interviews we've ever done, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of, personal development, and we're not just talking about fantasy and just the books, but this is kind of the premise of our podcast: is how does fantasy affect people, and how does it change people's lives, and how does it help people develop? It's not just escapism. It's not just entertainment.
Right.
It is those things, but it is also part of how we grow as humans. This episode has been really reflective of that, and thank you so much for all of your wisdom. And
it is wonderful to talk to an author who, again, neither of us have been published, and we're still very, very early in this journey, and it's nice to see that there are folks that do see this deeper side to this genre, or even just the craft of writing in general, and just how, words are very impressive and flowery and great, but it's really all about messages and the communication of your values and what you believe. And I think that, like you've mentioned, I found it really admirable that you pointed out that risk is a huge part of this game that we're playing, if you want to call it that, or this journey is it entails the peril of putting your neck on the line. I think that that's what a lot of people need to hear, not just in the context of us as a part of a community of fantasy nerds or whatever. I just, like, in general, and in this time that we're in, this time of weird uncertainty and of virus and staying indoors and being cut off from people. That was wonderful to hear. That was really, really good. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been good. I would love to talk with you again, and to do it. Doesn't even have to be a podcast. We can just talk.
Yeah.
So that it's totally up to you. Text me if you ever wondering something crazy or not, and I'll be happy to Skype with you. And but if you want to read my books, they're good. Let me rephrase that. I've got great editors who make me look good. And one last thing about my editors: they're on different sides of the world. One of them lives in inner city in Kansas, identifies as a black woman, and is just snarky. The other is from West Texas, homeschool, very, very straight-laced, never married. She's, they're both about the same age. And what scares me is when they get together on my works and say, David, no. Or David, because they're from different sides of the planet, man.
Yeah.
And I'm honored and blessed to have them. They're so special. And so it's a good network, and I'm just pleasure. They're really good people. They make me look good. Because my wife and I decided she would not edit my works because we wanted to keep her married.
Yeah, that would definitely test that.
Yeah. I know that I'm a little bit reluctant to read Shalini's work.
I love reading your work.
Yeah, I know, so I have to return the favor. Yeah.
Yeah. That's okay. We'll get there in time.
We
Once you finish your book, then you might feel like you're ready to dive into mine. So.
Yeah, I think that's true. David, just to be terse, do we have time for you to plug where people can buy your books online?
Oh, William David Ellis author.com is my website, and then I have a Facebook site. And again, I grew up with a Smith Corona and whiteout, and so I'm still learning. That's why I couldn't get onto Michael Evans' podcast yesterday, because I kept hitting the wrong dadgum button.
Oh, no.
And every time I try, I couldn't do a reading. So Facebook page, William David Ellis author, and the website, William David Ellis author. Keep it simple. And then I'm on Amazon. The Harry Ferguson Chronicles, The Princess Who Forgot She's Beautiful, Dances with My Dragon, Kisses of My Enemy. And then there's a box set that I just put out. It's got to stay on there for 30 days before I can put it in a discount. And then this thing that E.G. Stone and I are doing, which should come out, I think her published date is April 15th. And that's an anthology of these virus-related short stories. So was that what you wanted me to say?
Yeah, brilliant. Perfect.
Okay.
We'll let you go, David. Yeah, and again, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on, sir.
Brother.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, be blessed.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care then.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Talk again soon.
Check out the description of this video, and you can see the different platforms we put our content on, as well as our social media links. Thanks again, and see you next time.